I love these realistic moments by the late Rachel Held Evans. They are a little disturbing and a little funny. They are funny because they poke fun of something we Christians sometimes do. We sometimes have a sentimental reading of the Bible. Some passages make us uncomfortable, and we either avoid them or we prune them back a little so that some pleasant emotion can bloom unobscured by the foliage of the whole experience. These pictures expose our sentimentalizing. This is the definition of sentimentality when applied to literature that I use in my English class. Sentimentality is indulgence in emotion for its own sake, or expression of more emotion than an occasion warrants. Sentimental literature is tear-jerking literature. It aims primarily at stimulating the emotions directly, rather than at communicating experience truly and freshly. It depends on trite and well-tried formulas for exciting emotion. It revels in old oaken buckets, rocking chairs, mother love, and the pitter-patter of little feet. It oversimplifies. It is unfaithful to the full complexity of human experience. Have you heard the Christmas Shoes song? Oh, the schlock! It may be the most sentimental piece of gunk ever written. It should come with a warning. I'll post a link to it in the description. But by the second chorus, you may be afflicted by emotional diabetes. You've been warned. If you can think of something more sentimental, please post it in the comments. That will be fun. I have an example of Christian sentimentalism. It's an oldie. It was a video that was played in church one Easter. It's called Watch the Lamb. It's the Easter story purged of most of its content, so that pretty much only one emotion remains. It's quite natural for the Easter story to evoke a variety of strong emotions, but this sentimental video demands that you have one emotion and that you have it right now. I remember in church that Easter, there were a lot of tears, but they weren't the natural result of a meaningful experience. They were the result of emotional manipulation, of sentimentalism. I'll post a link to it in the description. So, to review, what's wrong with sentimentality? Well, it lacks balance. Flannery O'Connor is one of my favorite authors. Her short stories are a lot like the Not So Precious Moments cartoons. She too challenges Christian sentimentality, and her stories too are a little disturbing and a little funny. There's one story of a presumptive farmer lady who gets gored by a bull, but she sees in her last moments that you can't put God in a box any more than you can put a bull in one. There's one where a whole family gets shot by a mass murderer, the grandma going last. She wasn't the good woman that she thought she was. Just before the bullet struck, she was struck with a childlike faith. And then there's a generous, hardworking church lady who gets slammed in the face with a textbook while she's sitting in a doctor's waiting room. Later, she has an epiphany that the first shall be last and the last shall be first. She gets in all right, but she's at the end of the line. O'Connor says that Christian sentimentality is a result of separating nature and grace, or to use different terms, the spiritual from the physical. She thinks, and she's right, that these things ought not to be separated. Our culture is modern, and one of the features of modern Christianity is that we have a tendency to separate nature from grace. Unlike the modern materialist, Christians don't dismiss the spiritual altogether, but under the influence of our culture, we think of God as being distant, and we struggle to make the spiritual relevant in our everyday lives. But wait, there's more. O'Connor says that when we separate nature from grace, grace is degraded to pious cliche, and nature becomes either sentimental or obscene. Let's look at both of these, starting with nature becoming sentimental or obscene. According to Flannery O'Connor, sentimentality is an excess, a distortion of sentiment usually in the direction of an overemphasis on innocence. And that innocence, whenever it is overemphasized in the ordinary human condition, tends by some natural law to become its opposite. When a physical or natural thing is stripped of its spiritual dimension, it can become unrealistically innocent, like old oaken buckets, or rocking chairs, or mother's love, or the pitter-patter of little feet. The innocent purity of these things is a lie. Since the fall, there is nothing that is not twisted by sin, not even a mother's love. And every mother knows that the pitter-patter of little feet is just the sound of a toddler on his way to the ensuite to destroy all her makeup. Precious Moments paraphernalia is an example of sentimentality. Not particularly Christian, but these figurines occupy the shelves and mantels of many a Christian home. They fit O'Connor's definition of sentimentality, with emphasis on innocence and purity. Look at this Precious Moments nativity scene. It comes with the figures of all the traditional observers of the Incarnation. At the very least, the story of the Nativity in the Bible is about unfulfilled expectations in God's plan for redemption. This version of the story shows that we have no need for redemption. If these are shepherds, what do Herod's soldiers look like? There is no scandal here that the creator of the universe was born in a barn. I have raised sheep, and the cute little ceramic balls of white ceramic fluff bear as little resemblance to the lambs as I do to the figurine of the shepherd. The Precious Moments sheep and the shepherds are sentimental distortions of actual sheep and actual people, where everything is stripped away except innocence. And then we get that emotion, which is what we're after, the emotion that's best expressed by aww. O'Connor hints that this kind of reductive sentimentality becomes obscene. Another word from O'Connor on sentimentality. She says, "We lost our innocence in the fall, and our return to it is through the redemption which was brought about by Christ's death and by our slow participation in it. Sentimentality is a skipping of this process in its concrete reality, and an early arrival at a mock state of innocence." I like how Oscar Wilde put it. He said that a sentimentalist is simply one who desires to have the luxury of an emotion without paying for it. So let's bring all this to church. The Apostle Paul describes our true and proper worship as a living sacrifice. That sounds like it will cost us something. Full worship involves forgetting ourselves and delighting in God above all things. When we worship, we do so with all of who we are, heart and soul and mind and body. Worship is a response to His greatness and a response to His grace, which involves the crucifixion of Jesus. It involves our smiles and our tears. On occasion, it may involve singing, but it always involves our work and our leisure, our conversations and our attitudes. Worship is internal, but also involves the whole body of Christ. It happens on Sunday, but it flows into Monday and on through the rest of the week to Saturday. Worship is to sacrifice yourself and your whole life. It will cost you. Lots of times when people say, "That was good worship," they mean that they had a pleasant emotional response to more than one of the songs we sang in church that Sunday. That's not worship, that's sentimentalism, and it's a result of our ordinary lives emptied of grace. Let's move on to Pious Cliche. Flannery O'Connor says that the separation of grace and nature does disservice to both. Grace emptied of nature becomes nothing more than pious cliché. It didn't take too long to think of a great example for this one. What spiritual thing has been emptied almost entirely from anything physical? The cross. The central symbol of the Christian faith. It's tattooed on our bodies, it's on our letterhead and buildings and bumpers, and it dangles from our ears and hangs around our necks. I saw a young man in full gangsta attire sporting a bejeweled rosary. I suppose it's possible that he was Catholic, but it's just as likely that the cross that he wears today will mean the same thing as the dog tags he wears tomorrow. And then, too, I will wonder if he's really a veteran. When we adorn our bodies or our clothes with these crosses, are we connecting it to the act of grace carried out through the humiliation and suffering of our Lord on a Roman torture device? This is a little easier for our Catholic brothers and sisters because Jesus' body is still on the crucifix. There are theological reasons for the Protestant removal of Christ's body from the cross, but an empty cross is a little easier to divorce from the physical reality of the crucifixion. And so it's also a smaller step to make the cross nothing more than a pious cliché. I'm not saying we shouldn't wear crosses, not at all. But we need to fill this spiritual symbol again with the physical. We need to reintroduce the physical dimensions of the crucifixion. A lot of people have written on this, and many Good Friday sermons have been preached on it. If you have not ever heard of the tortures of crucifixion, I suggest you read A Physician's View to the Crucifixion of Jesus Christ. The link is in the description below. If we bridge the gap between the physical reality of the crucifixion and the spiritual symbol around our neck, the necklace becomes a declaration of the depth of our sin. In Jesus' agony and sorrow, we begin to get the idea of the cost of our redemption. The necklace also becomes a declaration of God's grace. The cross is a reprieve from death for people who deserve death. None of us deserves heaven. But God is love, and by His grace and mercy we are saved. Because of this, the cross is also a call to action. We are called into Jesus' work of redeeming the world by joining His revolution. The cross, whether we wear one or not, is more than just an accessory. It frames how we live our lives. Well, that's what it does if we've managed to blur the boundary between nature and grace. By all means, wear a cross, but as you put it on, feel the weight of it. There's a lot of stuff packed in there. One more example for us to think about. Is communion, as you celebrate it in your church, a pious cliche? Is it just bread and wine? Is it just a remembrance? I'll certainly be digging into this one in the future. We can avoid sentimentalism and pious cliche by seeing the physical world everywhere infused with the transcendent, and the so-called spiritual things as grounded in the stuff of life. But it's so hard for us to do in our culture. We've been brought up with the separation. But it can, I think, be done. How? I have some ideas on that too, which will be the subject of future videos, so please subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss a thing. But for now, let's just say that there's not a thing or an action on this earth that is not infused with heaven and hell. Apples, communion, sex, rain, singing in church, your body, and the Starbucks coffee you picked up at the drive-thru. Each of these is a spiritual and a physical event. Thank you for watching. Till next time.